She did not know he had roused from his sleep, the first sleep of those 3 days of torture which he could not remember now. And he, looking at her, made no movement to tell her he was awake. One of his hands lay over the edge of the bed, and so lightly he could scarce feel the weight of her fingers she laid one of her own upon it, and a little at a time drew it to her, until the bandaged thing was against her lips. It was strange she did not hear his heart, which seemed all at once to beat like a drum inside him. Suddenly he sensed the fact that his other hand was not bandaged. He was lying on his side, with his right arm partly under him, and against that hand he felt the softness of Marie Anne's cheek, the velvety crush of her hair. And then he whispered, "Marie Anne!" She still lay, for a moment, utterly motionless. Then, slowly, as if believing he had spoken her name in his sleep, she raised her head and looked into his wide-open eyes. There was no word between them in that breath or two. His bandaged hand and his well hand went to her face and hair, and then a sobbing cry came from Marie Anne, and swiftly she crushed her face down to his, holding him close with both her arms for a moment. And after that, as on that other day when she kissed him after the fight, she was up and gone so quickly that her name had scarcely left his lips when the door closed behind her and he heard her running down the hall. He called after her, "Marie Anne! Marie Anne!" He heard another door, and voices, and quick footsteps again, coming his way, and he was waiting eagerly, half on his elbow, when into his room came Nepapinas and Carmin Fanchet. And again he saw the glory of something in the woman's face. His eyes must have burned strangely as he stared at her, but it did not change that light in her own, and her hands were wonderfully gentle as she helped Nepapinas raise him so that he was sitting up straight, with pillows at his back. "It doesn't hurt so much now, does it?" she asked, her voice low with a mothering tenderness. He shook his head. "No. What is the matter?" "You were burned terribly. For 2 days and nights you were in great pain, but for many hours you have been sleeping, and Nepapinas says the burns will not hurt any more. If it had not been for you—" She bent over him, her hand touched his face, and now he began to understand the meaning of that glory shining in her eyes. "If it hadn't been for you, he would have died." She drew back, turning to the door. "He is coming to see you, alone," she said, a little broken note in her throat. "And I pray God you will see with clear understanding, David Carrigan, and forgive me, as I have forgiven you, for a thing that happened long ago." He waited. His head was in a jumble, and his thoughts were tumbling over one another in an effort to evolve some sort of coherence out of things amazing and unexpected. One thing was impressed upon him. He had saved St. Pierre's life, and because he had done this, Carmin Fanchet was very tender to him. She had kissed him, and Marie Anne had kissed him, and a strange dawning was coming to him, thrilling him to his finger-tips. He listened. A new sound was approaching from the hall. His door was opened, and a wheel chair was rolled in by old Nepapinas. In the chair was St. Pierre Audemard. Feet and hands and arms were wrapped in bandages, but his face was uncovered and wreathed in smiling happiness when he saw David propped up against his pillows. Nepapinas rolled him close to the bed, and then shuffled out. And as he closed the door, David was sure he heard the subdued whispering of feminine voices down the hall. "How are you, David?" asked St. Pierre. "Fine," nodded Carrigan. "And you?" "A bit scorched, and a broken leg." He held up his padded hands. "Would be dead if you hadn't carried me to the river. Carmen says she owes you her life for having saved mine." "And Marie Anne?" "That's what I've come to tell you about," said St. Pierre. "The instant they knew you were able to listen, both Carmen and Marie Anne insisted that I come and tell you things. But if you don't feel well enough to hear me now—" "Go on," almost threatened David. The look of cheer which had illumined St. Pierre's face faded away, and David saw in its place the lines of sorrow which had settled there. He turned his gaze toward a window through which the afternoon sun was coming, and nodded slowly. "You saw. Out there. He's dead. They buried him in a casket made of sweet cedar. He loved the smell of that. He was like a little child. And once, a long time ago, he was a splendid man, a greater and better man than St. Pierre, his brother, will ever be. What he did was right and just, M'sieu David. He was the oldest, 16, when the thing happened. I was only 9, and didn't fully understand. But he saw it all, the death of our father, because a powerful factor wanted my mother. And after that he knew how and why our mother died, but not a word of it did he tell us until years later, after the day of vengeance was past. You understand, David? He didn't want me in that. He did it alone, with good friends from the upper north. He killed the murderers of our mother and father, and then he buried himself deeper into the forests with us, and we took our mother's family names, which was Boulain, and settled here on the Yellowknife. Roger, Black Roger as you know him, brought the bones of our father and mother and buried them over in the edge of that plain where he died, and where our first cabin stood. 5 years ago a falling tree crushed him out of shape, and his mind went at the same time, so that he has been like a little child, and was always seeking for Roger Audemard, the man he once was. That was the man your law wanted. Roger Audemard, our brother." "Our brother!" cried David. "Who is the other?" "My sister." "Yes?" "Marie Anne." "Good God!" choked David. "St. Pierre, do you lie? Is this another bit of trickery?" "It is the truth," said St. Pierre. "Marie Anne is my sister, and Carmen, whom you saw in my arms through the cabin window—" He paused, smiling into David's staring eyes, taking full measure of recompense in the other's heart-breaking attitude as he waited. "Is my wife, M'sieu David." A great gasp of breath came out of Carrigan. "Yes, my wife, and the greatest-hearted woman that ever lived, without one exception in all the world," cried St. Pierre, a fierce pride in his voice. "It was she, and not Marie Anne, who shot you on that strip of sand, David Carrigan. Mon Dieu, I tell you not one woman in a million would have done what she did, let you live. Why? Listen, monsieur, and you will understand at last. She had a brother, years younger than she, and to that brother she was mother, sister, everything, because they had no parents almost from babyhood. She worshipped him. And he was bad. Yet the worse he became, the more she loved him and prayed for him. Years ago she became my wife, and I fought with her to save the brother. But he belonged to the devil, hand and foot, and at last he left us and went south, and became what he was when you were sent out to get him, Sergeant Carrigan. It was then that my wife went down to make a last fight to save him, to bring him back, and you know how she made that fight, monsieur, until the day you hanged him." St. Pierre was leaning from his chair, his face ablaze. "Tell me, did she not fight?" he cried. "And you, until the